But that's the way it goes. Sometimes we're in a moment where we are expecting something and we're completely surprised. And oftentimes that surprise hits us in a place that we didn't expect. When I was growing up, we had all kinds of opportunities to enjoy things exactly how we liked it. And I don't know if your childhood was one where you could figure out things and do things that you wanted to do, but one of the things that we enjoyed doing was listening to the radio and sitting there with a blank cassette tape and two fingers on the play and record button, because you had to have both of them there, right? And waiting for the first few notes of that song that you wanted to have, right? And so we waited and listened and wanted the DJ to stop talking, right? And then finally, we get to record, right? And then we get to that point where we have amassed, because I had those 90-minute Memorex tapes, okay? They were extended play, okay? And so finally, you filled up the first side, and you got to flip that thing over and do it again. And it was one of those reminders that so many places in my life, I have tried to make things exactly the way that I wanted, only receiving the things that I wanted, only keeping the things that I wanted. And there's something about a mixtape, or maybe if you're a little bit older, but not, or a little bit younger, but not too much younger, it was a CD, and you procured music through a now defunct organization, and you put those on your CDs and you played those in your car. And we found out that there's this moment where we find ourselves moved by the things that are around us. But even now, there's this going way back to vinyl. How many of you enjoy the pop and the crack of vinyl? Yeah, because there's nothing quite like it. But here's the disappointing thing about vinyl. It's like 3 songs on one side, right? Then you gotta flip it again. And it is extremely labor intensive. It's not efficient, right? It's less convenient in almost every single way, because you can't instantly skip a track, and you can't endlessly shuffle your songs without much attention. You can't just casually consume vinyl without paying attention, with having 15 other distractions. When you sit down and you play a record, you have to slow down. Here's what you do. You place the pressing on the turntable, put it right there, turn on the power, lift up the arm, and you move it over. And if you were fancy, you had one of those little lift things, right? If not, it was a really crazy game, right? Okay, so you position it just so, and you lower the needle, and then you hear it, the faint pop and the crackle. And then eventually the music begins, and then you sit with it. And the music fills with the room differently because you're paying attention to the music that is coming into the room. And maybe that's why so many people have been drawn back to vinyl in the most recent years. I think in a world that is built on speed, a world that is filled with distraction and constant scrolling, there's something about grounding ourselves and slowing down long enough to actually listen. And maybe that's exactly why so many of our souls are exhausted right now. Because our modern culture has conditioned us into constant distraction. See, we do things like we scroll constantly. In fact, they say that we touch our phones over 2,000 times a day. And most of the time, it's without even thinking. How many times have you pulled your phone out of your pocket or your purse and unlocked it and scrolled to something, and then you're like, what am I doing? It's because we consume constantly. There's not a moment, it seems, that there's not something trying and vying for our attention. And we live in such a culture that we move constantly. Your schedule is so packed that you don't have time to just sit still. And what we find out is that we then react constantly. It's not purposeful, intentional moments and movements. It's a reaction to the things that are going on. See, our entertainment that we have has trained us to skip into things quickly. And truly, if something doesn't immediately hold our attention, we move on. Case in point, we watched an old movie over the past week. When I say old, we're just talking like 1989, 90. Do you know how incredibly slow those movies move? It's like they wanted to develop a plot, and they wanted you to think about what was going on and take in the visuals. It's insane. And so we're sitting there fighting to pay attention to something that was invested in and made to be one of the most dramatic moments or one of the most visually compelling movies of that time. And we find that we're bored because it goes too slow. So what do? We load another video. We read another article. We listen to another podcast, but we can't listen to it at 1 speed. We have to listen to it at 1.5 speed. And if you're really a pro, it's 2.0 speed. And then our phones and everything around us constantly give us notifications. I have an app on my phone that tells me when my refrigerator door is left open. And then we look for other opinions, one that more closely matches what we want. And if we're not careful, we carry that same fragmented rhythm into our relationship with God. We begin to pray distracted. We step into worship while our minds are wandering elsewhere. We read scripture quickly and we don't pay attention. And we attend church while our affection is attached to 100 different things. And here's what happens. Our soul begins to dry out. And it's slow. Prayer becomes thinner. Joy, it's so inconsistent, and worship is about the mechanics. The presence of God, he just feels distant. And it's not because God moved away, but it's because our souls have been formed by the constant noise instead of sustained worship. And that's why we are beginning this series called Summer Psalms, a playlist for the soul. You see, the Psalms were never meant to be background noise. They were songs for real people walking through real seasons of things like fear and grief and exhaustion and worship and guilt and waiting and confession, joy, worship and longing. And the Psalms give language to our souls. And over the next several weeks, we're going to walk through these Psalms together. Because reframed worship forms our souls in the presence of God. And that's the heart of this series. See, worship is not merely music. It's not simply singing. It's not merely emotional expression. Worship is what we direct our attention toward. Worship is a reflection of who or what we trust, what we pursue, what we cling to. Worship reveals what shapes us, because your soul is always being formed by something. And it's just like those grooves that get etched in a master plate that presses a record. See, those grooves, those little hills and valleys, they capture the waves of sound so that that sound can be played again and again and again. But see, things like fear forms grooves in the soul. Distraction, it forms grooves in the soul. Entertainment forms grooves in the soul, and success forms grooves in the soul, and hidden sin forms grooves in the soul. But worship forms grooves as well. Whatever repeatedly fills our soul eventually shapes our soul. In Psalm 63, that's where we're going to be today. Psalm 63 is written by a man who understands what spiritual thirst is like. In this psalm, it was born in the wilderness. It was a psalm of David, and David is not sitting comfortably in a palace when he writes the words that we're going to read today. He's sitting in a desert. He's sitting in the desert of Judah. He's isolated. He's uncertain, and he is vulnerable. He is wandering through a dry and a weary land. But remarkably, what happens is David's first concern is not about his survival. His first concern is not about his comfort or even his escape from the trouble that he sees looming. David's first concern is the presence of God. So let's read Psalm 63. Verse 1, "You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you, I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory, because your love is better than life. My lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live. And in your name I will lift up my hands. I will be fully satisfied with the richest of foods. With singing lips my mouth will praise you. On my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night, because you are my help. I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me. Those who want to kill me will be destroyed. They will go down to the depths of the earth. They will be given over to the sword. They will become food for jackals. But the king will rejoice in God. All who swear by God will glory in him, while the mouths of liars will be silent." So this psalm, it begins with this confession: you, God, are my God, and I earnestly seek you. You, God, are my God, and I thirst for you. My whole being, it longs for you in a land that is dry, parched. There is no water. See, David is not hiding the condition that he's in. He admits that he is thirsty, but not thirsty for water in this sense, but thirsty for the living God, because there is a dryness in his soul. And let's be honest, we sit with too much pride often to even confess that. Because one of the easiest things for us to do is pretend that we are spiritually fine, because we've been taught. We've watched from the masters. We know how to perform. We know how to make our life appear stable, to keep functioning. But did you know that functioning just doing the basic things of life, and flourishing are not the same thing. You can be productive, but be spiritually dry. You can be busy, but still feel distant from God. And you can attend church while your soul quietly deteriorates underneath the surface. And the frightening thing about spiritual dryness is that it often hides behind a quote, normal life. Because in normal life, people still go to work. They still laugh at conversation. They still post family pictures. They still show up at church and they still accomplish goals. But meanwhile, their soul, it slowly loses delight in God. See, David refuses to fake that he has strength here. He says, God, you're my God, and my soul, the very pit of who I am, it thirsts for you. He doesn't say, listen, God, you know how difficult this day is. He doesn't say, God, you know that my schedule is exhausting, that, God, my enemies, they're frustrating. He says, my soul thirsts. My soul thirsts. And that word matters because biblically, our soul is our inner life before God. Our soul is that inner portion of us that is not affected truly if we are living in the presence of God. But our soul is described as the seat of affection, the seat of desire, the place where worship comes from. It's a place of longing and surrender for David, and he recognizes that the soul cannot thrive disconnected from the presence of God. And that's why maybe most of the modern solutions that we have in life, they fail to heal our spiritual dryness because they're only talking about, 10 ways to get that beach bod. They're talking about 3 moments to regain your sanity. And we assume, really, when we feel dry, we feel disconnected, here's what we assume: I just need a vacation. That's all I need, a vacation. You know what I need? I need to laugh more. I need more entertainment. It's a rough few weeks. I just need some rest. I need a break. Just need to get away. Now, physical rest does matter because God created us with limitations. But sometimes what we call exhaustion is actually spiritual dehydration. Because there are things that can entertain our minds while our soul is starving. There are things that stimulate our attention, but they weaken our affection for God, and eventually our soul starts feeling restless because it was created for more than distraction. It's created more than for a 30-second reel. It was created, our soul was created to have communion with God. And this is what makes Psalm 63 so powerful. David is physically thirsty in the wilderness. He is physically thirsty, but he recognizes that his thirst is deeper. His thirst is spiritual. And see what David doesn't do. David does not first seek escape from the wilderness. He seeks God in the wilderness. And this should change our view. Because when we're in those spots, when we're in the dry, when we're in the parched, when we're in the places that are tough, most of us instinctively pray, God, get me out of here. God, would you get me out of the stress? God, would you just take the stress away? God, would you remove that uncertainty? Because I'm tired of not knowing what's next. God, and to be honest, God, I'm tired of waiting. Because waiting makes me uncomfortable. But David, here's what he says. David says, God, I want you. God, I want you. And that is worship. Real worship is not dependent on ideal conditions. It is rooted in the presence of God. And this is where modern Christianity often struggles deeply. We've learned how to consume spiritual content. We have joined the Facebook pages. We have the emails that come in. We watch the streams on live TV. We watch them recorded. We get them in any way that we want. We've learned to consume spiritual content without even lingering in the presence of God. We know how to listen to sermons, sing songs. We even quote verses and we repost devotionals. And we do so without actually slowing down long enough to worship, to reshape our souls. And eventually, our attention, it drifts. Maybe our attention is not drifting toward evil things, it's just drifting toward lesser things, like comfort and achievement. I know if I post this, people are going to see it and they're going to think how good and Christian I am. So we look for approval. We put our minds towards entertainment. We bring ourselves to a moment where we feel like if we can control or be more busy or just really maneuver things, we're going to be okay. And slowly, here's what happens. Those pursuits begin to shape and disciple our soul. We become shaped by what we repeatedly seek. And this is why David said, earnestly I seek you. This wasn't casual, and it's not occasional. And it wasn't when it was just convenient. The wilderness clarified for David his thirst and his hunger. And sometimes God allows dryness to expose what our souls have been depending on beside him. And that's uncomfortable. But it's deeply merciful because thirst has a way of revealing what truly satisfies. David continues in verse 3. He says, because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. Because, God, your love is better than anything I can experience in this life, I will glorify you. He's not denying the reality he's in. He's not doing that. He's reframing reality through the presence of God. And all of this is real. He's in the wilderness. He has hardship. He's in uncertainty, but God's steadfast love is greater than all of that still. And this is one of the great gifts of worship. Worship recenters reality, not with escape from life, but by restoring an eternal perspective within our souls. So notice the things that happen in the psalm. David moves from thirst to remembrance, to delight, to trust. Because worship, it changes what fills the room of our soul. And verse 5 says, I will be fully satisfied. As with the richest foods, with singing lips, my mouth will praise you. David describes the presence of God as nourishment because your soul was never designed to survive on distractions alone. The world promises satisfaction, but it can never sustain it. everything fades quickly. The excitement, it fades. That purchase, a new thing comes out, it fades. The entertainment fades. The applause fade. The distractions, they fade. Then the soul starts to thirst once more. But David says, my soul will be satisfied. Not because of the circumstances improved, not because he automatically got whisked away to something better, but because God himself became the satisfaction for David's soul. But see, distracted souls struggle to delight in God. If our minds are constantly scattered, our worship gets very shallow. And if our attention is on everything else, our affection for God, it will slowly weaken. And eventually we'll find ourselves spiritually dry without even understanding why. Psalm 63 reminds us the answer is not merely trying harder spiritually. The answer is returning our attention and affection to the presence of God. The psalm ultimately points us toward Jesus because Jesus is the fulfillment of soul thirst. In John 7, Jesus says, let anyone who is thirsty do what? Come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as scripture says, rivers of living water will flow from within them. Come to me, believe in me, and your soul will be gushing with living water. John chapter 6, he says, I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Jesus is not merely helpful for thirsty souls. He is the only true satisfaction for our souls. And no amount of self-improvement can restore a soul. No amount of emotional honesty alone can heal spiritual dryness. And no amount of entertainment can replace communion with God. Because only Jesus reconciles us to the Father. Only Jesus restores what sin had fractured, and only Jesus satisfies the deepest hunger of our soul. And today we observe communion, and communion matters deeply because it interrupts distraction. It forces us to slow down long enough to remember that Christ's body was broken for me. Christ's blood was poured out for me. Christ suffered for me. Christ's grace covers me. Christ's resurrection gives me the hope of resurrection. Christ gave me an invitation to new life. And in a world that is discipling us towards constant noise, communion recenters the soul around the things that matter most. We remember that Jesus entered the wilderness for us. We remember that Jesus endured suffering for us. We remember that he carried our sin to the cross and then he rose again so that thirsty souls could be reconciled to God. So maybe today your soul feels dry. Maybe worship has become mechanical. Maybe prayer feels distant. Maybe your affection has slowly attached itself to things that cannot truly sustain you. And if that's you, then hear this clearly. Dryness is not the end of the story. Sometimes God exposes thirst because he is drawing us back toward himself. Perhaps this entire psalm is an invitation not to perform, not to pretend, not to strive harder, but maybe it's an invitation for us to return our attention to return our affection, to return our worship, to return our soul to the presence of God. Because reframed worship forms our souls in the presence of God. So this week, I want to challenge you to intentionally slow down. Take a walk. Take a prayer walk without constant noise. Maybe take the headphones out for a little while. Definitely turn the notifications off for a moment. Sit quietly before God. Maybe just journal honestly and ask yourself, what has been shaping the grooves of my soul lately? What repeatedly fills your mind? What consumes your affection? What do you instinctively run toward for comfort? And then when you've done that, ask the Lord honestly, earnestly, say, Lord, teach my soul to thirst for you again. Because the goal of the Christian life is not merely surviving spiritually. The goal of the Christian life is delighting in God, discovering that His steadfast love is better than life. And when worship is reframed around the presence of God, even dry souls begin coming alive again. Would you pray with me?